Before we begin, inshallah, if we can recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all of our shuhada, for all of our ulama, for all of the marhumin, of those who are here present, for all of the marhumin who are across the world. And in addition, I received a message from a dear friend, an Afghanistani friend, and one of his family members unfortunately passed away whilst at work. He was in his 40s with 3 young children. And we asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless Sayyid Abbas Sadat. He was buried just a couple of days ago. Rahimallahu man qara'a Surat Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المأسومين المذلومين واللعنة الله على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. وصلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا حجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Today we'll take our discussion on a very different angle. And it's a discussion that really must be focused on because it's one that could impact generations to come. We understand and we all know, because we've all been through it, that humans are born weak. When we're born, we're completely needy unto our parents. We're not able to do anything, the simplest of things, except perhaps breathe. And even at that, at some points, we're helped to try and breathe when we're born. And parents suddenly become a critical nourisher for this child for many years. Not just for days, but for many years. Obviously, through the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and through the rizq bestowed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But as time goes on, they develop. We developed physically and mentally. And this process can take anywhere between 25 to 40 years before a human is at their peak of adulthood, where they're fully mature both physically and mentally. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a beautiful line in the Quran where He says, it is Allah who created you in weakness and then granted you strength. And after some time, He allots you weakness and grey hair to you. I.e., you start with nothing, Allah gives you strength, and then at some point, He gives you weakness again, and He gives you grey hairs again. And He continues, He creates whatever He wills for you, for He is all-knowing and all-powerful. And some of us have had that opportunity to see our parents go from them looking after us to us looking after them. Given that in this prime age of what we can call the youth, where these young male and female members of our community and society have this huge amount of energy, they have this burning desire to progress like they'll never do in the other parts of their life, society must heavily invest in them. And society does heavily invest in them. And when I say society, I include the likes of Disney, who are investing heavily into our youth. Whether they're investing for the right reasons or not is for you to decipher. Facebook hire some of the smartest behavioral psychologists who specialize in how do young individuals think, so that they spend as much time on their application than anything else. Their metric in these companies like Netflix, like Facebook, like Twitter, like Instagram, coming from someone in the industry, is that you want to know how much time they spend, their usage time, the stickiness of your product. They don't care about anything else. So they're investing in our youth, arguably more than we invest in our youth. And what is scary when you then put that together is that the youth are pivotal to what the future generation of this community will look like and even how ready this community will be for the revolution of our awaited Savior, which we discussed a few nights ago. Because they're tomorrow's leaders. Therefore, what we want to try and understand in tonight's session, using the works of Ayatollah Sayyid Fadl Milani, is Islam's viewpoint on youth. What does Islam actually have to say about it? And to look at it, we're going to seek inspiration from the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alihi. We're going to see 3 examples of young individuals who he bestows huge responsibility on. Not just because they're randoms, but because they showed a certain amount of quality. So we'll understand the qualities that they have and the qualities we need to train our youth in, but also, once they've reached that level, how much responsibility the elders need to put on the youngsters' shoulders and trust that they can do a job. And the analysis that we'll take is that we'll look at the importance of starting education at an early age for our youth, the importance of young people submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the stage prior to adulthood, that gap between childhood to adulthood, which is so formative in their years, and finally the challenge of deciding between logic and desire. And then we'll look at some examples from Karabakh of youth that perhaps we don't know as well, just to see the examples that they give and the lessons that they provide us too. Now, I may, as I discuss this, keep saying we need to do this for our youth, we need to do this for our youth, which may create the narrative for my dear youth, who I'm still a part of, right? Still there for a few more years. That we don't need to do anything. That we should just wait for our elders to give us all of this. That's not at all what my narrative is. If I say that, please, please, please keep this point in mind, that the expectation is twofold. It's on our elders to create an amazing environment for the youth to flourish, and it's for the responsibility on the youth to make sure they do whatever it takes also to flourish, and maybe to speak with the elderly generation and say, hey, look, this isn't right. We need to make this better. It is a collaboration between the 2 generations such that we can create this amazing future set of leaders. Inshallah, if you would like to go on this journey together, kindly offer a salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We'll start with a fascinating narration from our Holy Prophet, and I'm sure many of you would have heard some of these narrations, but it will just really align for us how critical the time of youth is. Well, the Holy Prophet's reported to say, on the day of reckoning, the first question people will be asked is how they managed their lives and how they spent their youthful years. The first question, which illustrates quite clearly the importance of this time of the youth. How blessed it is. How fortunate you, my dear youth, are still to be a part of. To the extent that this appears to be the top of the priority of questions that we get asked in the next life. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam is reported to say that when Luqman advised his son, he said, when you are summoned to appear before your Lord, you'll be asked how you spent your youthful years, how you managed your life, how you made your living, and how you spent your wealth. All of these are important, but primarily, how you spent your youthful years. When Allah gave you this special energy, this able body, this budding and buzzing intellect that can pick up languages like this and ideas and concepts like this, where you can stay up all night and still be fresh in the morning and give it your all. What did you do with that energy that Allah gave you? And Amir al-Mu'mineen describes youthfulness as a bounty that is not appreciated until it is over and done with, which I'm sure we look to our elders and they'll probably say, yeah, you guys are lucky. You've still got it in you. I wish I still had it in you. Even though the Holy Prophet's companions were usually a little bit older, he would still pay particular attention and focus on the youth. He would engage them and get them to understand and undertake important roles. And in some cases, you would actually find the elders of the companions that they wouldn't be too happy about this. And the Prophet would have to explain to them and convince them and win them over to say, these guys have potential. They've got the know-how. We need to trust them. And I would like to share 3 examples. Sayyid Father shares 3 examples of individuals at the time of the Prophet who he really entrusted with significant responsibility. The names were written in English, so I may mispronounce them because I couldn't find the Arabic for them, so please forgive me for that. The first example is a man by the name of Musab ibn Umair, a young boy who embraced Islam before the Prophet had even migrated to Medina. And when he heard the Holy Prophet reciting Quran, his heart was so touched that he immediately became a loyal follower. First thing that I take from this, just from a layman's perspective, the value of the recitation of Quran is able to turn hearts. So this is a message at this point for you all. We have Brother Sibtain with us, who you've heard has a phenomenal voice, especially in the art of reciting Quran, yet this room is barely a quarter full when he's reciting these verses. The Prophet is indicating that an individual who he trusted, one of the things that changed him, one of the things that inspired him was the recitation of Quran. And these are the very same words that Brother Sibtain is reciting for us. So I hope tomorrow you're able to try and come on time, in time, to hear these words of Quran. And if you would like to pledge that allegiance, perhaps kindly offer salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Interestingly, we then find with Musab that when his parents found out that he had this loyal following of the Holy Prophet, they weren't happy. And they actually confined him into the house, hoping that he'd return to his senses. But he remained steadfast. My dear youth, what does that tell us? If we find ourselves moving towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our parents are perhaps an obstacle, of course we keep our adab, but we keep on that path towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And my dear parents, may we never be accused of our children of stopping them reaching Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's frightening to think that we could fall into that trap. So what about this man? He fought in Badr. That would be enough to say what a phenomenal young man. He then fought in Uhud and he was martyred there. He dies as a shaheed. There were 2 well-known people of Medina that visited Mecca, and they heard the Prophet's invite towards Islam. They became converts, and they then asked the Prophet to send someone with them who would then be able to teach the Quran and invite people to the faith, to accompany them when they returned to Medina. You can imagine maybe like a community scholar, if you like, a resident alim, as we like to call it. The Prophet appoints Musab. How many times in our communities we said, oh no, this man is too young. He's too young to be doing this. On what grounds have you assessed him? On what grounds? On his taqwa? On the recommendation of his teachers? On his sincerity? Or just on his age? Just on his age and how many views on YouTube. Those are the 2 things I'll compare it to. The Prophet appoints him to accompany them, almost like as a community scholar for them. And as a result, he's honored to be the first individual to lead prayer in Medina, to lead the Friday prayer in Medina for those who had embraced Islam. Imagine the level that the Prophet saw this young man. Look at the empowerment that the Prophet teaches us. Say, go and find these young individuals in your community. Nurture them, look after them, give them responsibility, elevate them, be a trampoline for them. Catch them if they fall. Don't berate them. Keep lifting them and teaching them and guiding them. A second individual by the name of Itab ibn Usayd. After the migration to Medina, the Prophet was regularly challenged by pagans, by idol worshippers, by the Jews, etc. And whilst Musab, who we just mentioned, did a fantastic job of trying to repel this, and whilst many still joined the faith, there was still work that needed to be done to establish a true Islamic environment, an environment where the values of Islam, of modesty and love and respect, were very much present. Note again the importance here that the Prophet sees, whilst there's people that have converted, I need to ensure that there's an Islamic environment in that city. My dear community members, if we were to evaluate the level of Islamic environment of our community, where do we rank? The Prophet sends someone to go and make sure it's more of an Islamic environment. We need to assess ourselves. And if a youth tells you, actually dear father, actually dear mother, actually dear uncle, dear grandfather, whoever, I'd rather not attend that gathering because it's not quite aligned with the Sharia of Allah. Do we berate them for not attending, or do we respect them for their stance towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Mecca had become liberated from paganism, and alongside Medina developed into centers of Islamic education with great moral values. However, shortly after the conquest of Mecca, we know that the tribes from Hunayn came. They started to cause a bit of trouble, and then we learn about the battle of Hunayn. So now, who looks after Mecca? Itab ibn Usayd is given the responsibility to look after Mecca. He led the congregational prayer in the absence of the Prophet in Mecca. And he was the first Amir to lead the Jama'ah prayer after the conquest of Mecca. The Prophet asked him, do you know over whom I have put you in charge? I have put you in charge of the people of Allah. Had I known someone better than you to take charge, I would not have done so. Look at the responsibility and the trust the Prophet puts in these youth. And history tells us that he's roughly around the age of just 21. So to my dear 21-year-olds, how far are we? Elders of the community, unsurprisingly, were not pleased. They complained to the Prophet. The Prophet therefore issued a statement about this individual's eligibility. How many elders of our community are willing to put their neck on the line for young, budding individuals who may be speaking the truth, but perhaps the elders aren't happy about it? How many elders are willing to put their neck on the line? The Prophet sees haqq in this young individual. The elders aren't happy. He speaks out in praise of this individual and telling them, do not even raise his age as a point. Don't even bother. Don't go near it. Because that's not the criteria for deciding who is a moral leader in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A third and final example, a slightly more well-known one, is Usama ibn Zayd. Towards the end of the Holy Prophet's life, he ordered the Muslims to confront the Romans and commanded all those who were physically able to stand up and fight in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or defend in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Huge numbers, and they're all now on the outskirts of Medina, huge numbers of soldiers. Who's going to lead this group? Usama. How old is Usama? He's reported to be 18. An 18-year-old leading this huge group on behalf of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam. And again we see companions, elderly companions, causing an issue. Some not even going. We don't need to go into who they are for now. And the Prophet was angry when he heard this. And he eventually mounts the pulpit to address the ummah. O people, he's reported to say, why do you create such a fuss about not being happy with my appointment of Usama? You did the same thing when I appointed his father, but by Allah, his father was the most eligible candidate for the position to which he was appointed. And his son is now the one who is most entitled to command this appointed position. The lesson being what? Obey your Imam even if it doesn't make sense to you. Trust that he has divine wisdom. And if he says it's an 18-year-old, let it be an 18-year-old. If he says follow the Imam and he happens to be a 7, 8-year-old in our latter Imams, let it be so. But I don't understand, my intellect doesn't allow me. أطيع الله وأطيع الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم. Minkum. Obey Allah, the Messenger, and those from among them. No questions asked. Bow your head. 18, 15, 100, 120. Whatever you say, O Prophet, whatever you say, O Imam Zaman, I submit because you have divine wisdom. I'll understand later. But today we've turned into a society where it's like, until I understand it, I won't obey. Abu Ayyub, who had participated with the Holy Prophet in all the battles, did not approve of this, and he declined to be part of the army. Yet later he expressed his regret. Again, a lesson. If we've made a mistake, own up to it. Simply own up to it. So we have at least three incredible examples of where the Holy Prophet has entrusted his youth with not just small positions. And we make this mistake. A youth stands up and says, I would like to get involved in organising the majlis. And we're like, okay, maybe you can stack the polystyrene cups outside for the tea. Okay, anything else you need me to do? Empower them. Give them responsibility. And oh youth, show values that would make your elders inspired by you to show this responsibility. If you're lazy, don't be surprised that they don't trust you. But our elders, if they're lazy, inspire them not to be. The qualities that are being sought after, a disciplined nature, which we're losing fast. Social media is killing us. I've got 10 minutes here, let me just sit on social media. I'm as guilty as anyone. I'm not saying I'm holier than thou in this one, hell no. Check the screen time, it's frightening. A disciplined individual, they're on it with their timings, with their productivity. Second, that we're looking for administrative ability. They know how to organize things. They know how to get things done. Thirdly, expertise. We want them to be phenomenal in specific areas of society. Go and study, go and invest, go and understand. And fourthly, but by no means finally, the depth of their faith. Do not leave behind the depth of faith. So what should we be doing in order to ensure that our youth can take on these responsibilities, so that when we all pass away as the elders, we know that the community that is to come is going to be one that flourishes? And as I said, my dear youth, this is as applicable to you as it is to the elders. Why? Because in just 40 years' time, you'll be asking yourselves the same question. What's going to happen in the next generation of your children? It's coming faster than you realize. Sayyid Fadl Milani outlines 4 things, starting with the importance of education at a very early age. Now, something beautiful about this community is clear. We really invest in our children's education. We really do. And the Holy Prophet backs this. He's reported to say learning during one's youth is akin to engraving in stone, while learning when one is old is akin to writing on water. On stone, it's stuck. In water, it's gone. But my question is, what type of education are we investing in? What type of education are we investing in? No one in this room would deny, I'd like to think from the discussions we've had so far, no one would deny that the spiritual realm that we have is greater than the physical realm. That our soul is more important than our physical body. And if we need to remind ourselves, we can just go look at what happens to a body after a few weeks, a few months, a few years after it's passed away. The spiritual realm is way greater. The education of the soul is way greater. It's amazing that we invest in our children's secular education. What about their spiritual education? What about their Islamic education? 2-3 hours a week of madrasa? At least in London it's 2, 3, 4 hours. One lecture that they miss half of because we came late. Or maybe it was in a language they don't fully understand, that they don't learn in. It's interesting, I remember I was at an Eid Salah recently in Shahr Ramadan. And it's a Pakistani community. Sorry, I have to put it out there because then you'll understand the point a little bit more. And before the alim stood up to give his khutbah for Eid Salah, the treasurer or the vice president stood up. And in English, he makes this announcement saying, dear brothers, we've just finished Shahr Ramadan. We need to make sure we have enough funds. Muharram is coming, so please, if you can, kindly donate. It's the day of Eid. It's very recommended to give, etc. Very lovely point. He sits down. The alim stands up and begins his khutbah in Urdu. So I asked him, I was like, just a quick question. Why is it that the vice president who speaks Urdu fluently delivers that message in Urdu, but the alim delivers in English, but the alim delivers it in Urdu? It's very important that everyone in the community understands that they need to give, but it's less important that everyone in the community understands the spiritual realm that the alim then speaks about. We have children in the UK who don't understand Urdu, just for context, right? And even here, some of us send our children to English-speaking schools. Why not Urdu-speaking schools? Perhaps because the education quality is better. But even if that's the case, acknowledge that they learn in English. Acknowledge that when they discuss religion, when they discuss complex concepts, perhaps they're more comfortable in English. That's okay. But then engage with them in religion in English as well, and invest in their Islamic education as well. We focus on teaching morality to our youth way too late as well. The education that we give them shouldn't just be textbooks. It's practice, it's modesty, it's chastity, it's mercy, it's love. It's not something that comes years later when they're 15, 16, 17. We'll come on to say that's too late. You have to take steps back now. It's not like, okay, enjoy all your pre-baligh years, and as soon as you're baligh, everything's going to change overnight. No, it doesn't work that way. And it's certainly going to work, say, when you become 18, that's when everything can change. No, invest in their spiritual education. Invest in their modesty way earlier. Otherwise, the damage is done. Amir al-Mu'mineen likens the heart of a child to an empty plot of land that readily accepts whatever is planted in it. That works for us and against us. What do I mean? This empty plot of land, if you chuck love, mercy, Hussein, Allah, everything on that, beautiful, beautiful. But unfortunately, Disney use a very similar quote, which I didn't manage to get onto my slides, where they're like, if we get involved in this kid early on enough, we give them free tickets under a certain age to attend. Genius, huh? We've got a customer for life. And we know in business, customers for life is what you aim for, right? Toyota talk about it all the time. Get them involved and ingrained with this princess, that prince, this guy, that monkey, and they'll grow up with it. Then they'll love Disneyland. Then after Disneyland, they'll take their kids to Disneyland, and they're reading books, and the Disney film comes out. They've got to watch the Disney. They're hooked. Because when that heart of the child was an empty plot of land that was readily accepted to whatever was going to be planted in it, we opted for Disney over Hussein. No, but Sadiq, I took them to 10 nights of Majalis. Yeah, but you let them watch 1,000 hours worth of Disney. So when you stack it up, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam is reported to say, I'm only pleased when Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. I'm only pleased when I see the young men among you occupy themselves in learning or teaching. For if they do not engage in either of these activities, they demonstrate that they are wasting their time and will not be successful. The amount of time I wasted on my PS3 at university was phenomenal. And we used to have like chats amongst friends to say, what's your game time? And when someone would reach a day, you'd be like, bro, you've played that game for a day. 24 hours. And then a day becomes 5. 5 becomes 10. You're like, dude, you've racked up 240 hours on a single game. And it was like a moment of pride. Thinking, how much time did I waste away? But in any case, a final thing just to mention on this point. For those of you who are inspired by the Quran, and as I said, we have a beautiful Quran recites with us at the beginning, be inspired by the Quran. When you go and speak to those who have become hafid of the Quran, protectors of the Quran, memorizers of the Quran, many times you'll hear, I started from a young age. Because that heart is ready to accept. It's ready to accept it. So plant those seeds of the Quran. Plant those seeds of Hussein. Let them see you reciting Quran. Let them see you remembering Hussein. And let that grow over the years. The importance of starting education, the right education, at an early age. The second point that Sayyid Fadl gives to us is the importance of youth submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which we've discussed a lot in terms of this concept of submission to Allah in these last few nights that we've had together. And Quran is very clear, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that we've been created so that we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Via acts of worship, people can then communicate with their Lord. They can begin this journey of submission. Shaykh bin Ahyan describes it beautifully, and maybe we'll do a session on salah perhaps in the coming nights, perhaps. But he gives this concept that when that salah time comes, you've got a decision to make. Either you continue in that game that you're playing, either you continue in that business call that you're in, or you prioritize Allah. The value if you prioritize Allah in that moment over that very legitimate thing that you may be doing, even if you're preparing a lecture, even if you're reciting Quran, even if you're doing azar, even if whatever you're doing in that moment when Allah calls you privately, because He knows exactly what you're doing and He has the perfect time for you to call to Him. When He calls you to prayer, if you are able to prioritize in that moment that nothing is greater than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your arrogance starts to drop, your heart starts to open, and Allah's greatness starts to instill within your heart. This is that submission. These youth that we'll talk about in Karbala, they commit themselves to what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it elevates their spiritual status as they get closer to Allah. Their ego goes, they're completely submissive. As we said yesterday, they become abds of Allah. Who are you? Allah is my Lord, don't worry about me. I have nothing. I am a faqir unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whilst everyone is obligated in the acts of salah, of zakat, of hajj, etc., there is a special emphasis Islam puts on the youth that conducts these actions. How many times do we hear individuals and they'll say, yeah, I'll start praying later on in life. I'll go to hajj later on in life. It's too expensive. I'll fast later on in life. Islam is trying to tell us, look, from early doors, get involved, because it's going to shape your life. The Holy Prophet's reported to say the superiority of the young people who have worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their youth over those who have only worshipped Him in old age is analogous to the elevated status prophets have over the rest of humankind. The status of the prophets. Just because in your youth, with all of these distractions, you managed to prioritize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and reach your full potential. In another hadith, the Holy Prophet's reported to say, Allah proudly draws the attention of the angels to a youthful worshipper to tell them, look at my servant. He has abandoned his desires solely to please me. And in another report, that there are 7 groups that Allah will shelter when no other shelter is to be found. Just rulers and the youth that remain steadfast in their worship. Those who delay repenting until they are old, they don't damage Allah. They damage themselves. They do an injustice to themselves. Speak to any elder who perhaps has delayed and ask of their regrets from when they were younger. And my dear elders, perhaps you even share that with the youngsters so that they can learn from you. Because we know there's no guarantee to remain alive. You all know of individuals who have passed away way before their time. And what's quite frightening, and I just learnt of this today, is that we actually see this attitude of, don't worry, I'll repent later on in life, in a specific point in Karbala involving the Mal'oon Umar ibn Sa'd. That he, according to history, was warned of the consequences of the heinous acts that he was about to carry out in being involved in the killing of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And his response, according to history, is as follows. It has been said that there is to be a paradise and a hell. If this is indeed true, I tell you that I will repent 2 years prior to my demise. And if this is not true, I say that I will have enjoyed living my life without concern. Imagine, it's like a spiritual gambler. Forget just a physical gambler, he's spiritually gambling. And maybe we've done the same too. When that day comes, then I'll get on with it. So my question is, if we want to create this environment whereby our youngsters are submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how does our environment fare? When we have these beautiful gatherings and salah time comes, are we stopping? Or are we continuing? Is it that it's like, oh, there's a salah room on the side somewhere, go and try and find it. And then they go to the bathroom and there's no water can for them to use. What kind of messages are we sending to our youth when we're not prioritizing their salah, when we're not prioritizing their tahara, when we're not prioritizing their spiritual ascension, when there's music being played at gatherings? What kind of environment are we setting up for our youth? If we want them to flourish and be the best versions of themselves, if we want them to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but all of our actions are saying otherwise. Oh youth, do you have an opportunity to say to Allah, the generations before me didn't set me up? I don't know. But I wouldn't count on it. You know intellectually what needs to be done. Oh, elders, you know intellectually what needs to be done. Speak to each other and engage. Bring the two generations together and find the godly society. Sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. The third point that Sayyid Fadl mentions, and he cites a very critical part of life. This period when a child is going from childhood to adulthood, perhaps as we can call adolescence, right? That gap. During these stages, as we all know, for those of us who have experienced it, physically and mentally, you are booming. So much is happening to you. And these are formative years. These are foundational years. This young individual that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been nurturing is about to turn baligh or baligha. And from that day, they are responsible for their decisions. So if you now tell them, actually don't listen to music, but they've been listening to it for the past 15 years, it's going to be pretty tough. If they've never picked up the Quran for 15 years and I'm like, okay, you're baligh now, let's get going, it's going to be pretty tough. But it's not just that it's tough to implement, it's the concern that from that day they are now decision making. So if they've been absent from the Quran, if they've been absent from majalis, if they've been absent from the teachings of Allah, that first day when they're baligh and they're told to make a decision because a woman walks in front of them and they're like, yeah, sure, why not? I'll have a look. We haven't set them up for success. We haven't set them up for success. And even worse, we don't even challenge them when they do that to guide them. No, we just kind of like, yeah, crack on. I don't want to upset you. What do you mean don't want to upset you? If someone had a sword and they were stabbing their hand, you would stop them because there's physical damage. If they're looking at the opposite gender in the wrong way, you would tell them, stop stabbing your spiritual soul. It's going to hurt you. It's going to hurt your marriage in the future. It's going to hurt your children. It's going to hurt everything. But we stay shtum, we don't say anything. We're too scared. I don't want to engage in this awkward conversation with my child. No way, no way. I can't say those words. I'm his dad. I'm her dad. Okay, so guess where he or she's going to get their advice from? The trusted eminent scholar of Instagram. No problem. No problem. And I was saying to the youngsters a few days ago, the explore page on Instagram, dangerous place. 2 clicks away. You don't even have to unlock your phone anymore. It hits your iris, right? Then it's 1 click, because 100% Instagram's on the homepage, and then it's there. 1 click away, in fact. And we as parents, we're too scared to engage with our children. And then we're worried when they're like, actually, no, I don't want to get married. Yeah, of course, because they're getting satisfied elsewhere. I'm sorry to put these points out there. I'm sorry. But you know that it's the case. You know that it's happening. They see all these different paths they can go down. They're now responsible for their decisions suddenly, and they haven't been trained until this day. So guess what? Wrong decisions are made. Oh, youth that are here, intellectually you know this isn't right. So even if you haven't had that tarbiyah, if you haven't had that upbringing, it's not an excuse. You know what is right and wrong. Please don't make the same mistakes that those of us who were there before you have made. Be together, help each other, fight for each other. Yes, we saw in Karbala a jihad, but your jihad is greater. We know this. That was the jihad of the sword. Yours is the jihad of the soul. Are we having these conversations with our next generation? Because if not, if they start to get used to seeing things they shouldn't see, don't be surprised if their children dress up in the ways that they used to see people. And suddenly modesty is gone. Modesty is gone. And everything else is gone. The fourth and final point before we move on to a little bit of history about some of the youth in Karbala is that a youth suddenly starts to recognize that they have something called logic and something called desire. They start to differentiate between the two. My brain knows this is the right decision, but my hawa or nafs, my lower desires that the Quran talks about, is telling me to do this. They're two major powers in decision making that are like a war. In every decision that you make, you choose which side. The side of Allah, which is your intellect, or the side of your lower desires, which is shaitan. And each decision you swing one way. And imagine if you had a chart, red being hawa'un nafs, red being a lowly decision, you've followed your lowly desires. Green being that you followed Allah. In the 100 decisions you make in a day, whether knowingly or unknowingly, how green versus red are you? How often are you checking your report each day? And what's scary is that for these youth at that point, those desires are flying. You've all been the elders, it's flying. So you've got to help them. It's vital that at this point, in these formative years, our youth have individuals that can resonate with them, that can have those conversations with them. If parents struggle with it, it's okay, admit it and find someone else. Find an amazing youth worker. Find an amazing youngster that these individuals can trust. Because they need to get it out, they need to talk, they need to engage. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam is so clear in a startling hadith. He's reported to say, ill desires remain wide awake whilst the intellect sleeps. Damn. Ill desires remain wide awake whilst the intellect sleeps. So you need people who are going to go to the youth and tap that intellect, poke it, and wake it up, and then let it explode. Let it do what the intellect can do. Let them invest the same amount that they do in their maths homework in their life, in their spiritual life, in the real life. And Amir al-Mu'mineen also warns us. He's reported to say, it is not unusual to find an intellect being held in captivity by ill desire. Don't be surprised. It happens. It is not unusual to find an intellect being held in captivity by ill desire. For those of you in Shahr Ramadan who were there for our majalis there, you remember that we spoke about the spiritual prison break. That you got to get out. You got to find a way. And just like Michael Scofield in Prison Break had a gang to help him, our youth need a gang, a nice gang, to help them. أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. So look, the potential of our youth is massive. It's critical. So much that they can even be appointed by the Holy Prophet for massive tasks. Imagine what they could do for this community, for the community of Karachi, for the community of Pakistan, for the community of our awaited Saviour. And whatever our youth do in the next few years will dictate the sort of community that your legacy will illustrate. Keep that in mind. That's your legacy. Because this is your generation that you brought up. So who they bring up shows what kind of product your product gave. And to get to the right way of thinking and decision making, we need to ensure we're talking about it. We need to ensure we're aligning our worldviews. It's really difficult, I hear that. But the education at an early age needs to be the right education. And as a parent, I'm now realizing just how tough it is. Do I choose a school that has amazing secular education, but perhaps not the best values? But that'll get them into uni. Or do I choose a school that has amazing moral values, but maybe not the best secular education? That'll get them into heaven. And we're debating it so much. Even though everyone knows you should choose this, this is so tough to ignore. And it's a crisis amongst us that with the wealth and the intellect that we have in this room alone, that we don't have a school that has phenomenal morals and phenomenal education. What a travesty that we don't have this. What a disservice to the ummah of Ali Muhammad. We said that Imam Sadiq mentioned that there's going to be 25 extra portions of knowledge. Yet our schools seem to be, or at least have the stereotype of, amazing values, bad quality education. Why are we not investing in them? Why are we not getting the best teachers in for them, whilst upkeeping the best morals and values? And maybe that's not the case here. I'm definitely talking on behalf of London though. What safe spaces have we created for our youngsters to engage and to talk? If at all any. And more worryingly, if there are no spaces for them to talk and engage that we've organised for them, then be very concerned in which environments they're then discussing these points and who with. Frightening. Some of the stuff coming out in schools nowadays, it is frightening. They need exemplars to be inspired by. Find them, Bring them to the community. Nurture them if they're already within the community. Make yourself accessible if you are one of them. And equally youth, don't wait for them. Because you have Qasim, you have Ali al-Akbar, you have these phenomenal individuals who will now go on to mention. But I hope the point is made that we need to work together, we need to be aware, and we can't just sit and rest on our laurels because it will bite us. Communication isn't just talking at the other generation. Communication is listening to the other generation. We have one mouth, two ears. The classic entrepreneur line. Communication is listening, active listening. Sit with the youngsters, tell me your frustrations. Open it, create an environment where they feel safe to share it. And listen to them, don't berate them for it. And equally, my dear youngsters, listen to the elders and what they have to say. And if there is a disagreement, no problem. The Quran has been sent down to reconcile between what is haqq and what is batil. Follow the Quran. And if one generation is holding on to batil and the other is holding on to haqq, it's your decision as to which angle you go down. What I wanted to do, inshallah, was to give some examples of the youth that were present in Karbala. We know we have Ali al-Akbar, we know we have Qasim, and we have nights dedicated to them. But I wanted to just mention a little bit of the history about some other individuals that were there. Some of them report their ages, others they just call them as youth. Firstly, we have two youths from Banu Jabir, Sayf ibn al-Harith ibn Sari and Malik ibn Abd ibn Sari. They were half brothers. And when things became very severe on Yawm al-Ashura, they approached the Imam with tears in their eyes. And the Imam asked them, why are you weeping? They said they were heartbroken at seeing the state of the Imam and their inability to defend him from the enemy. The Imam eventually prayed for them. And therefore, we need to learn from that our youth, we need to be willing to give up whatever for the Imam. Give up whatever. Doesn't matter what age you are. Give up whatever you have for the Imam. Junada ibn al-Harith and his son Amr. After Junada passes away, the father, his son then follows him into the battlefield. And I find that subtle point beautiful. Karbala is phenomenal. These subtleties that you can pick up. A father showing, as we say, talk the talk, walk the walk. A father says, come to Majlis, come to Majlis, come to Majlis, come to Majlis, and is late. What does that tell to the son or to the daughter? It's okay to be late for the Majlis. The father says, make sure that your salah is on time. Yet they see the father praying at 11:50 p.m. The father or the mother saying, wear this type of garment. But they're not wearing it. We've got to be honest with ourselves. We've got to be honest with ourselves. In this case, Junada goes into the battlefield saying, I'm going to defend my Imam. Guess what the son does? He walks right in his footsteps. And he also is martyred in the way of haqq. Another youth whose name is debated in history, and this story really struck me. Some know him as Amr ibn Junada, or potentially he was the son of Muslim ibn Awsija, according to Shaykh Abbas al-Qummi. But regardless of his name, after he had been martyred, his mother encouraged him to go, after his father, had been martyred, his mother then encouraged him to go and be shaheed in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So again, you've got this father going, the son following. But you also have the mother in that tarbiyah, identifying haqq and encouraging their child towards haqq. He went, he's martyred. It doesn't end there. The enemy soldiers then threw his severed head in the direction of his camp, of the camp of Imam. And look at the courage of this mother. And I say this to my dear mothers, for your daughters who are going through a tricky time, or your sons who are going through a tricky time. When the challenge also reaches you, hold strong to that haqq. Because that is your staunchness where you can support your child. The head is thrown back towards the camp of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And what does this mother do? She picks it up, she blesses it, and she throws the head back towards the enemy. She then picks up one of the poles from the tent and rushes to then attack them, at which point the Imam spoke words of blessing to her, but instructed her to turn back from the battlefield. A father and a mother, when they see their child wanting to go towards Allah, help them. Do not stand in their way. That is something we as parents will have to hold our hands up for on Yawm al-Qiyamah. We then get those slightly closer towards Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Ja'far ibn Ali, the youngest brother of Al-Abbas alayhi salam. Sources suggest that he was 19 or in his early 20s. And Ziyarat Nahiyah praises him. Imagine what a level you have to reach. Peace be upon Ja'far, the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen, who displayed measured patience, who was a traveller far from his home, who submitted to the call to war, who was one of the first to go to battle, and who was outnumbered by the aggressors. May Allah send la'an on his killer, Hani ibn Thubayt al-Hadrami. He gets outnumbered by the aggressors. How many of us have felt when we want to speak up out against the community for something that is godly, that the community rises against us? He continues, we continue. Haqq is haqq. Whether it's lonely or with everyone, haqq is haqq. He has aggressors ready to kill him for standing for it. If we have our loved ones ready to berate us for it, no problem. We do it with adab and respect, but we travel towards haqq. Abdullah ibn Ali, a son of Imam Ali and al-Binin alayhi salam, reports saying that he was roughly 25 years old. Al-Abbas alayhi salam wanted to see his brothers in battle defending the Imam, such that he could earn the reward of patience and forbearance. He'd say to Abdullah, according to history, go forth before me so that I may watch you fight and give witness to your sacrifice, for you have no children. We learn here siblings now supporting one another. Don't worry, bro. You want to go and do that? I'm going to back you. It works laterally now. The older brother, the younger brother, the older sister, the younger sister. If you see your sibling going towards Allah, hold their hand and go with them. And if you're nervous, ask if they can take you with them. But the sibling relationship is vital, especially for the older siblings, because you are like a leader to your younger siblings. If they see you not going towards Allah, they'll do much the same. And guess what? That elder sibling is inspired by the parents. He too is mentioned in the ziyarah of Rajabiyah and Nahiyah. Uthman ibn Ali, 21 years old according to history, he's brought down by an arrow, and then a man from Banu Aban beheads him. Muhammad ibn Ali, 22 years old. Some say he was killed, others say he was ill but present. Yazid ibn Nubayt had 10 sons. Imagine this, 10 sons. All of whom he invited to come and support the Imam. Look at that as a message to the parents. You have your children, call them towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Call them, be active. Out of those 10, how many go? Unfortunately, just 2. Just 2. Ultimately, they were martyred in the way of Allah, and according to reports, it was in the first wave of attacks against Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam's camp. And then we start to get even closer to Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Where we have Imam al-Hassan, one of Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam's sons. And we won't talk about al-Qasim today, we'll save him for tomorrow or the day after roughly. But we're talking now about another son of Imam al-Hassan known as Abdullah, the youngest shaheed after Ali al-Asghar. And this is heartbreaking. My dear brothers and sisters, if you have an uncle in your family that you really look up to, or an aunt in your family that you really look up to, who is a true muttaqi, who is that inspirational spiritual leader of your family, stand by them. They may be standing for haqq. Go and stand by them. Islam values that relationship of the uncle to the nephew or the niece. Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam's son Abdullah, he would see the enemy soldiers surrounding Imam al-Hussein in his final moments. And we know the description of those final moments where Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is there, and one by one they're coming to take a hit. They're chucking stones, intimidating arrows. This young individual, early years of his life, sees his Imam and rushes out to the Imam. Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam tries to stop him but is unsuccessful. He rushes to the Imam, and look at his courage for a young man. He challenges this enemy of Allah and says, do you want to kill my uncle? This enemy of Allah looks towards this boy and strikes him. But what's tragic It's that this young boy, for those of you who have young children, you know how soft those arms are that they have that touch your chest. That he would put his arm out to defend himself, and his arm would be struck at that young age by a sword destined for an adult. And it would almost sever this arm of the son of Al-Hasan alayhi salam. He would cry, "Oh mother!" Imam alayhi salam would hold him to his chest and is reported to say, "Oh my nephew, bear with patience what has happened to you and try to see the goodness in it. When that jihad gets tough, encourage that young child of yours." Imam's reported to go on and say, "Try to see the good in it, for Allah will now unite you with your noble forefathers, with Allah's messengers Ali ibn Abi Talib, with Hamza, with Ja'far, with Al-Hasan ibn Ali, may Allah's blessings be upon them." According to one report, this was not the end for this young son of Al-Hasan, because whilst this young boy would be with his uncle Hussein in his last moments, the enemies of Allah would go one step further, and the mal'oon by the name of Hurmala, who was known to be an archer, it said according to this narration that he would shoot this young boy with an arrow, killing him as he would sit in the lap of Hussein. Ya Hussein. Of course, we then have the likes of Al-Qasim and Al-Ali and Al-Akbar, but we'll save them for now. Even after the martyrdom, we see two youths from the household of the Prophet, grandsons of Abdullah ibn Ja'far, went to a man of a tribe of Tayyi, and they sought his protection, and this enemy of Allah lied to them. According to history, he was like, "Yeah, I'll take care of you," and instead he killed them and beheads them. And then he brings their heads to Ibn Ziyad. You can see how vicious these times were for Ali Muhammad. Vicious. Killing before, killing during, killing after, nothing except blood of Ali Muhammad. But there is one very special youth who had to witness all of this. There is one special, precious heart who had been nurtured by Imam al-Hussein, who had to witness all of this, who had to hear all these cries, who had to look around and see the chaos in this land of Karbala. And when Imam alayhi salam would bid farewell to the women and the children, he would hold this young person to his chest according to history and say these lines. And oh dear fathers, and even mothers, but oh dear fathers, you will know how much it hurts to say goodbye to your young children. Hussein alayhi salam is reported to said, "You should know, O Sukaina, that after me your tears will be prolonged when death claims me. Do not burn my heart with your tears of anguish while my soul still resides in my body. But after I am killed, you will have more right to weep over me, oh the best of women. You tell me if there's a young girl in the community that is to lose their father or a loved one, how careful you'll be when you talk to that young girl. You would bring her whatever she wants. You would make sure she sleeps with someone in the room to accompany her so she doesn't have nightmares. And if she were to wake up, you would grab that young girl, hold her to your chest and reassure her that everything's okay. But you know you can't repair the heartbreak that she's had from losing her father. Everyone would be so gentle, any request granted, even the smallest of noises would wake them up. They'd be frightened. It's just normal for a young girl, but especially when they've lost their father. So now tell me, O mu'mineen, how sensitive is Sukaina on the night of Sham Ghariba? Does she look to Furat and call out, Ya Abbas, my uncle, come to my aid? Or does she look to Hussein on the battlefield and see horses trampling over her father's body? But I ask you, O mu'mineen, if a small sound would hurt and scare a young girl who has just lost their father, then what if they hear the voices of the enemies of Allah calling them to loot the tents of Zahra and to set alight to the tents of Zahra? What does Sukaina do now? Oh Sukaina, who do you turn to now? There is a report that Sukaina alayhi salam has a dream that really breaks the heart. And it says that on the 4th day of our captivity, I had a dream. This is from Sayyid Sukaina alayhi salam, related in Al-Malhuf. I had a dream, Sukaina. I saw a lady seated. She had placed her hand on her head. Sukaina asks who she was and was told she is Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad, your grandmother, Sukaina. أعظم الله لك الأجر يا زهراء. Sukaina thought, by Allah, I must go to her and tell her what has been done to us. I rushed towards her until I caught up with her and stood before her. In tears I said to her, Oh mother, by Allah, they violated our rights. Oh mother, by Allah, they destroyed our group. Oh mother, by Allah, they desecrated our women folk. Oh mother Zahra, they killed our father Hussein. Zahra would say to Sukaina, hold your words, dear Sukaina, for they have cut my heart to pieces and ignited my liver with anguish. Here is the shirt of your father Hussein, which I will not part with until I meet Allah. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. يا الله, Ya Allah, we ask you to allow our youth to be those who set up the foundation of Sahib al-Zaman. Ya Allah, allow our youth to be inspired by the youth of Karbala. Ya Allah, allow our youth to go towards you from now until their last breath. Ya Allah, if any of our youth may have gone in the wrong direction, direction except their forgiveness and turn towards you, Ya Allah. بحق الزهراء وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها والسر المستودع فيها. مات مع حسين. يا حسين، يا حسين.